Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Office is Dead, Long Live the Office, an event in partnership with Gowling WLG. My name is Jon Fletcher. I'm the Director of Finance and Commercial Policy at the British Property Federation, a trade body representing investors, owners, managers, developers of UK real estate. Now, while reports of the office's death are probably greatly exaggerated, COVID has forced office users to really think about what offices are for and what they want to get out of them. And nobody's quite sure yet where we're going to end up. And, as with everything in life, there's unlikely to be one universally adopted approach. But as we get closer to a more widespread return to the offices over the coming weeks, there are some big questions that are worth thinking about. And we're going to spend the next hour or so looking at three of them in particular. So firstly, what do office occupiers want from their offices post-COVID? How soon might they get what they want? And then what does all of this mean for the owners and investors of offices and those who lend against office property? We want this session to be really useful to you, so please do use the Q&A function in Zoom below to share your thoughts and questions, and we'll definitely do our best to tackle those as we go along. And to help us navigate through these topics, I'm delighted to be joined by some excellent panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves now, just giving a very short, 1 minute maximum summary of why this topic is important to them. So if we start with Michael.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, my name is Michael Wood. I'm a portfolio director at M&G Real Estate. We manage a large number of portfolio of assets across the UK and Europe, both stabilised and also developments. So we're heavily invested in the sector and interested in any structural or cyclical changes that may drive performance, particularly within our funds.
Thanks. Denise?
Hello, hi. I'm Denise Burgess. I'm the Corporate Real Estate and Workplace Services Director for Atkins, which was recently taken over by S&C Lavalin. I look after about 80 offices in UK and Europe for about 10,000 staff. This is obviously really important to me because property is the second highest item that we have our spend on, and therefore making sure that we've got the right estate in the right places and the right size is absolutely critical. So real hot topic.
Thanks. Felicity.
I'm Felicity Lindsay. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG in the real estate department. I head up our offices sector, so this is what I do. So I'm really interested to hear from the other panelists their experience of both investing and using office space.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Ian. I'm Sharon Quinlan and I run the real estate finance business for HSBC in the UK. Obviously, as part of that business, we have a reasonable amount of exposure to office property. It's clearly been a very investable asset class over a number of years. Outside of that, also I work in an office, so I have a very clear vested interest in terms of what happens to this sector. And I think the challenges that have emerged post-COVID are going to change, and I think it's what we're obviously going to talk about, but I'm really interested and keen to hear the views as to what people think as to what those changes will be.
Thanks, Sharon. And Dan.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dan Gwilliam. I'm another partner at Gownings, work alongside Felicity. So you've got a double act today from us. We're not quite ant and deck yet, but for this sector, obviously, yes, we're a very real estate focused business. We've got two hats really in the ring here. One is wanting to be the best advisor we possibly can be to the market and help with the leadership towards the evolution of the office sector. Particularly it's an exciting time, but also we're large occupiers as an international business as well. So we're delighted to be involved and to have worked with the BPF on this project.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you all very much for sparing the time to talk and share your thoughts today. We're going to start off by a quick canter through a really interesting report that Gowling and we did surveying a number of large office occupiers. Felicity is going to take us through some of the key points.
Thanks, Jon. I hope that you all have a chance to read the report, which contains some really interesting data, actually, some of which I found quite surprising, and some of which will come on, no doubt, to speak about a bit later. But to answer Jon's question about what occupiers want, the report found, perhaps unsurprisingly, that overwhelmingly the answer to that question was flexibility. So it's really difficult for tenants to make long-term decisions at the moment. We all know from our personal lives that planning for anything isn't easy, and many office occupiers don't want to commit themselves to anything with longer term implications until the COVID situation becomes much clearer. But in addition to that overarching need for flexibility, the report found that there were 5 top drivers for occupiers who were looking to move offices, and those drivers I've set out there on the slide. No surprise, you'll see that location came out top with 48%. And then we have a conflict, actually. The next 36% that said that they wanted more office space to facilitate social distancing. But then there was a large chunk that said that they would downsize because their staff will work remotely. One of the surprises for me in the results of the survey was just how soon those tenants might get to make the move. 89% told us that they have the flexibility to move in the next 3 years, whether that's because of an upcoming break or the expiry of their lease. And that figure rises to 95% when we looked at larger organisations, and that's anybody with 1,000 plus employees. So there is change coming, and it's coming relatively quickly if those statistics are an accurate reflection of the office market nationally. So as we said earlier, location was a top driver in any office move, but where do those occupiers want to be? Well, that question was answered with 37% saying that they wanted to be in London. Manchester came in second with 26, and Birmingham came third with 16% of respondents to the survey wanting to move their office there. So what role does the serviced office play in all of this? Given the desire for flexibility, it's no surprise that 84% of our respondents to the survey said that they already used service offices, or they were considering using them in order to meet the office requirements and give them the flexibility that they need. Almost a third of our respondents said that offices would help them reduce costs and allow them the flexibility to scale up or down. 9% were reluctant to share the space with other occupiers, whether that's for COVID related reasons or for business related reasons. So maybe serviced offices aren't for everybody. What did come through from the survey though is that occupiers are looking to their landlords to support them in those evolving needs and offer the flexibility that I've already mentioned. So specifically, occupiers are looking for 5 key things, and those are set out there on the slide. More adaptable open space came out top of the list. More flexible tenancies, we've already mentioned, but you'll see that 37% of the respondents wanted that. In-house amenities, 33% came in third. A greater emphasis on sustainability and a willingness from landlords to work more closely with occupiers to better understand their needs and evolve with them also came out as one of the top 5. So is the office dead? Well, the answer to that from our survey, at least, is no. So long live the office, hurrah. 82% of our respondents said that there will always be a business need for offices, and they see various benefits from office occupation. The benefits of offices include physical meeting space for clients and colleagues to aid productivity. It's a tool to maintain strong team cultures, and I think we all recognise the mental health and well-being aspects that come from office occupation. A large number of our respondents, 40% of them, said offices help to support learning and development of their staff, and 31% said that office space helped to aid collaboration between colleagues and inspire creativity. Just leave that slide up for you for a second for you to digest some of those key figures. Is this a watershed moment for landlords? Well, the report identified 4 key areas which seems to indicate that that's the case. So flexibility we've already discussed, but landlords also need to bear in mind 3 other things in the coming years, I think. Sustainability. So you'll all know that the government set ambitious targets to reduce UK emissions by at least 68% by 2030, and that will bring even greater focus on sustainability in the workplace, and offices are obviously key to that. Innovation. So with some element of remote working seemingly here to stay, then office occupiers will want to be confident that they have the right digital infrastructure in place. And I think that the way that offices are used will change. Some are predicting greater emphasis on collaborative working, meaning that offices will be configured and used differently. And I think landlords who engage with their occupiers to help to identify and to predict those requirements and then deliver on them for them will effectively gain from the market disruption that we're seeing at the moment and benefit from this. And then lastly, feedback from our research shows that there's a pull to city centre locations, and the key UK cities remain attractive to occupiers, but there is a shortage of Grade A space that fulfills the requirements. So landlords who have that space and can configure it and suit the demands of the occupier market could really reap the rewards. So I hope when you get a chance, you'll have a chance to read the report, and I'll hand back over to Jon, who's going to take us through the rest of the session.
Thanks, Felicity. Some, really interesting insights there, and I'm going to throw it back to the panelists here. Just what really stood out to you from that report? Maybe if you had to pick one thing from the survey that really caught your attention, what would it be and why? And if we start maybe with Denise and then go on to Michael and Sharon, so sort of up the relationship chain, as it were.
I think the bit that was particularly interesting for me is just how people want to use the offices in the future, and what the offices are going to be used for. So in terms of why are we coming into the office, and just seeing also the comment around serviced offices. So we already use serviced offices to a degree, but we're going to be using them far more in the future, and I think that provides it gives a lot more flexibility. This is all about flexibility, isn't it? In the future, we want to make sure that we've got the right size property in the right locations, and a really good way to do that is to sort of maximise the use of serviced offices. In our case, we'll be using them for small regional offices, and obviously keeping hub offices in some of the key locations. But yeah, seeing the findings on serviced offices was particularly useful from my perspective.
I think from my perspective, what resonated the most were the respondents' comments around the future office being a place to support learning, as well as a mental health for employees, essentially prioritising employees' wellness and development. In my view, office is going to be a place where it'll be a choice of staff to come to the office in the future. Therefore, we need to create spaces where people want to be. This is definitely something we're doing and factoring into some of the buildings we're doing at the moment. So we're looking at building amenity, wellness, a balanced provision of collaborative and quiet focused working spaces, and also areas to promote innovation and learning within our schemes. So I think that's probably the point I took out of it the most.
And from my perspective, I think the biggest point that struck me was just the volume of activity and change that could occur over the next 3 years. I think the report or the survey quoted 89%, rising to 95% of occupiers had the ability to change their office space over the next 3 years. So the issue is very prevalent at the moment, and I think that's right and fair given the experience that we've all lived through over the last 15-16 months. And I think that is sparking a different thought process. The fact that those thought processes have the opportunity to turn into action in a relatively short time frame, should that be what occupiers choose to do, I think that means that there will be some significant kind of structural change really going on through the office sector in a relatively short-term time frame. So I think on that basis, landlords need to be aware, funders need to be aware, that the whole dynamic is changing, and that's the thing that really sort of struck me quite clearly.
Dan, I mean, you were more closely involved with the research, and what really stood out to you?
I think, as Sharon says, it's a combination of just the volume of occupiers that can make choices, and then that really leads on to the questions, as we set out in the slides. What are the drivers for people to make decisions? And I thought what was quite interesting when we looked at the data was that although location came out on top again, which maybe could be a surprise in the midst of the COVID crisis, the other drivers were fairly evenly placed in terms of how important they were to people. And I think that underlines that occupiers at the moment have got a much wider set of considerations than ever before, which obviously feeds into the thoughts of the investors and developers and funders as well. So it's a precarious time in the sense of where the market's going for all of us in the next year. And the evolution is obviously going to be much faster than the industry's seen, I think, ever in its history. So it's fascinating to see how this will work out and being part of that dialogue really for us. And I think what's interesting as well is that people will need to consider not just short-term need, but where this leaves them for the longer term, because although we're seeing this greater drive for flexibility, when you talk to businesses and you talk to occupiers, of course, they need a home and they need an identity with their business. So the idea of great flexibility in chopping and changing really doesn't work for the medium term. And there's a wider sort of thought process thing which will occur over time in that sense.
Let's try and bring some of those drivers a bit more to life. And Denise, again, if I could turn to you, I mean, to what extent has COVID and the changing mindset that has prompted changed what you see Atkins' use of offices for? And what's the main value and purpose for you of having offices?
It's quite COVID's quite interesting, because obviously for there's been such a negative impact on our daily lives and what have you. But actually, from a property perspective, from my perspective, it's actually massively accelerated a journey I was already on. So I've been with the company for about 15 years, and I've been responsible for real estate for UK&E for the last 10 of those. And in that period, I've been on a journey to convert to agile or more agile working. So we'd pre-COVID, we ditched pedestals or desk side storage, as my colleague tries to slip them in occasionally, but we ditched those many years ago, and I think most companies have. And we've gone to sort of the locker approach and the general ethos around agile working. But pre-COVID, we were working on targets of about 80%. So about 80% desks in comparison to headcount. And at that point, I wouldn't, from my perspective, it wasn't an ambitious target. It was a very easily achievable target. But from the business's perspective, it was all a little bit of teeth sucking and we can manage along at 80%. But at the time, I was already looking to be a bit more aggressive. And through, I think we'll come on to utilisation in a minute, but through looking at utilisation, I could see that we still had so much vacant space that we weren't using. And I believed that 50% was a more realistic target. Now, because of COVID, it's actually enabled us to get through our senior leadership team a move to this 50% agility. And that's what we're now looking at. And if you look at, the cost of reducing your estate by 50%, it's massive. It's absolutely massive from a business perspective. Now, clearly, you can't just offload your property. You have to invest in new properties. You have to wait for lease breaks to come up. But COVID has really, really accelerated my journey, and that's amazing. And then obviously the spaces that we've got, flexibility is key. So as I've already mentioned, from our perspective, we are looking to use serviced offices a little bit more for the smaller offices. So if we've got under 15, 20 desks, then we're looking more for a serviced office solution. But for the larger offices, it's really important that we've got the flexibility. And interestingly, we actually have gone to using pods a lot more for meeting rooms. So the freestanding units rather than fixed units, because you can take them with you if you have a short lease and you move to another property. But obviously it means that we can churn the space and actually adapt our spaces quite easily, and then we don't have all those horrendous DLAP discussions and what have you at the end of a lease.
But all of the rest of the panelists have, as already mentioned, you're all occupiers as well as advisors, owners, and lenders. So if I could maybe turn to Sharon, I mean, you're a huge office occupier. What do you see your business's space requirements likely to be over the next few years, and how's that going to change?
So HSBC obviously has a huge national footprint in terms of its office occupation, both through high street branches, if you like, from a retail banking perspective, but also through corporate office space. And I think, you know, our CEO has been sort of quite clear in sort of commenting on the fact that our physical office property requirements will be reducing over the coming years. Now, you know, there's lots of reasons for that. There are part of our businesses that are being strategically, you know, changed and moving direction, which means that there is a natural need for less office space, but also there is a very clear recognition that, you know, people will work differently in a post-COVID environment. And, you know, there is a very clear move for people to move to a more hybrid, you know, style of working, and be far more agile, as Denise has talked about. So we are currently in the throes of trying to logistically work out how, you know, how we occupy the property that we do have on a far more agile basis, and how that looks from a hybrid perspective when you take into consideration, you know, not only what individual employees have a desire in terms of how they want to work going forward, whether that be 2 days in the office or 3 days or 4 days, but also what the business requirements are, and of course what our client requirements are. You know, banking and finance at the end of the day is a service industry, so, you know, whatever we might choose to do as a business has got to ultimately meet the needs of our customers. But there is a very clear expectation that there will be a far more hybrid style of working, and that will ultimately result in less office space being required. But I think how that office space is used will be quite different to how it is currently used. And I don't think you'll see rows of desks with screens and people sitting there, you know, doing their emails and having telephone calls. I think the space needs to be far more collaborative, because people can actually do their emails and that type of stuff from a different location, whether that be home or somewhere else. So big changes ahead, I think, but I'm not sure that we're through the full thought process as yet to be able to implement that.
Does anybody on the panel have a different view to that? You know, do you think actually over time old habits will kick back in and we'll be going back to the office 5 days a week?
I don't think so, Jon. I can probably just comment that M&G actually moved to our new offices in 2019, and we were already starting to look at flexible working, you know, wellness technologies. So I think we'd started it already, but I think the pandemic probably more turbocharged that. So whereas potentially people were working 1 day a week from home, they could be now doing a hybrid working pattern of 2 to 3 days in the office, with some people in more, some people in less. But like I say, we've already got a few people back already, but we're not proposing a sort of full move back in till September. But yeah, I'd probably echo the points that Sharon's made from a large occupier point of view anyway.
I do have a view that if the offices still look and feel the same as they always have, when people go back to work, it will be a lot harder for people to change their behaviour if the office still looks exactly as it used to look prior to COVID. So if people came into an office every day, sat at a desk, looked at screens to do emails and take telephone calls, and post-COVID they go back to their office and it still looks, you know, rows of banks of desks, rows of screens, it will be very hard for individuals to change their behaviour into only using offices for more collaborative meetings or discussions. You know, until the physical office changes itself, I think people's behaviour, or we're at risk of people slipping back to old habits and old behaviours.
Yeah, we're up to about 10%, 15% in some of the offices occupancy at the moment. But the question with regard to, you know, do we think it'll slip back? I think hybrid working is going to be here to stay. Obviously we're not there at the moment, but as we start to unlock, I think the hybrid working will be here to stay. Clearly, the biggest issue is that you're going to have peaks troughs in the offices, and how do you manage those peaks and troughs? So, for a considerable period of time, pre-COVID, but obviously it's now far more important. We're looking at which days of the week do you come into the office. So we're not mandating who comes in on which day, because that sort of jars in the face of well-being and all the flexibility and the mobility contracts that we're giving people. But what we are looking at is, if we have got training and sort of large meetings of groups of people, then actually why not schedule those meetings and note that training session, learning session on days which are less busy, which are typically obviously a Monday or a Friday. So yeah, it interrupts people's travel, and you might get a few people that are a bit fed up about it, but it actually then takes a little bit of the strain off of the the busy days in the office.
I also see a difference between locations. So we have a Birmingham and a London office, and actually the stats in those two offices for us are quite different. We've seen about only 5% attendance in London, but we're up at sort of 15 or 20 in Birmingham, and I think we might see a divergence across the country, because people will have different ways of getting to the office. It's not just about what happens when you're there. So I think all of those will mean that we might find that there's a split depending on where you're located as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind viewers, please do use the Q&A function to let us know what you're thinking about what panelists are saying, or if you've got any questions, or if there's anything you'd like to add. Like I said, it'd be really useful to get some views from you on all of these really interesting topics. In the meantime, I think we'll continue and I guess move on to sort of what kind of conversations are happening already, if indeed any are. I mean, it's still fairly early days, as we've already said, but I mean, Michael, what's office occupied demand like out there at the moment, and to what extent are these desires for adaptability and flexibility that we've already identified coming through in conversations that you're having with potential occupiers?
I think it really depends on sort of the type of business you've got and the importance of office space to an occupier, whether it's an HQ or looking for supplementary office space. I mean, the discussions that we're having on some of our larger schemes are that HQ occupiers are still looking for well-connected, amenity-rich locations, more modern offices, so they can attract and retain talent. And for this space, we're still seeing people sign relatively long leases at market rents, albeit the rental concessions have increased across some sectors. But I think market evidence, which is showing an increasing take-up of new Grade A space, is a testament to the fact that occupiers are concerned with bringing their employees back to not to outdated secondary space, but to modern space. And I think the concern we've got around some of the secondary space is landlords are going to have to be more flexible about either terms they offer or works they're going to have to do to the property to upgrade it, to attract people. But again, I think we're involved in quite sort of large, high-profile screens across the country. But we're also finding that ESG is an increasingly important part of what people are looking for, particularly around reducing their carbon footprint. So, yeah, I think it depends. But I think the impression we get that prime, well-let prime offices in good locations are still showing relatively strong demand.
Nodding there from Denise and Sharon. Either of you want to come in on some of the points that Mike's just made?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Michael. It is really interesting. We're just about to sign a lease for 2 Grade A brand new buildings on our portfolio, both of which are reasonable sizes for us. The location was really, really important to us, but the sustainability elements, the ability to travel to the offices, the cycle provision, the welfare provision, all of that was absolutely critical to us, and it was really, really important. And I think, as Michael sort of hinted on, I think the second-hand space is going to become tricky. I think one with the EPCs that they're looking to improve. Say that we have to have higher ratings, but from a sustainability perspective, it's just really important that we look at the energy that we use. And we can't ignore the embodied energy involved in or required to actually build a building, but the grade A spaces are definitely up there at the moment. With regard to rents, not really seeing rents dropping at all at the moment. There are large incentives out there, obviously.
And I think the ESG agenda is really quite interesting and will be an absolute key driver of office occupation going forward. I think tenants, and when I'm talking about tenants, I mean corporate tenants now, are just having to be far more demanding in terms of, you know, what space they want to take and just what facilities and amenities are offered within that space, because I think that employees of large corporates are now, you know, far more aware of the well-being agenda, and actually if large corporates like banks and other, you know, big corporate employers want to attract and retain the best talent, they have to take into consideration where they want that talent to work. And if it's in an office building or any kind of hybrid solution, the provision of more than just a desk and a computer and a screen, I think has to be on offer. I think buildings, you know, the tenants will be looking for cleaner airflow, they will be looking for amenity space, they will be looking for natural light or good lighting, all the things that actually make the environment within which their employees work more comfortable, more suited to, you know, that well-being agenda that people are looking for now. And I think that ultimately will boil down to a talent attraction and a talent retention agenda that all corporates will have. I think that will take time to work through, but, you know, grade A will no longer mean just what we perhaps have been used to grade A meaning. I think grade A now comes with it a whole new agenda around sustainability and green building principles that can't be ignored.
Yeah, and thank you very much to those who've posted some questions. I'm going to direct a couple of them at Felicity and Dan. Before I do though, I mean, to what extent are you seeing some of these changing requirements filter through into the kind of contracts that the owners and occupiers are signing, and is that proving a challenge at all? And then secondly, just picking one of the questions, so to what extent are you seeing a difference in attitudes and approaches to hybrid working across age groups? So, you know, are there perhaps younger colleagues of yours who would like more interaction, and perhaps more established ones who quite like the peace and quiet, perhaps, of being at home?
I think there is a divide between age groups, and I think slightly to my surprise, actually, the younger members of our team really are keen to get back into the office. And they've missed that interaction more perhaps than than my age group, and I think they've really missed out actually on the learning and the sort of you know, that sort of picking things up by osmosis, and I think that was fine for a while. I think they're beginning to sort of really feel that they're missing out. You know, that they're not learning, they're not progressing as quickly as they would have done if they'd been in the office. And although you've got, you know, people looming down on you and keeping an eye on what you're doing, and that has its downsides, I think it's outweighed by the benefits, that they feel that it's outweighed by the benefits of having, you know, having your colleagues around you, having that support there, and learning by just being in and around people. So I definitely think that there's a sort of age-based you know, divide between those who really want to go back and those who perhaps do quite like the peace and quiet that you mentioned, John.
Now, and just the on the other point, and I see it's come through sort of in one of the questions, yeah, how will all this flexibility change the kind of terms that business owners and occupiers, or property owners and their occupiers, have to negotiate? Dan, do you want to take that one?
Shall I take that as the younger member of the group, my youth attitudes?
Cheeky monkey.
Yeah, okay. I think what's interesting is that, well, lease term compression has obviously been coming down the tracks for quite some time, so we've already seen that, and I think again, it's We use phrase earlier, I think Mike was saying it's been turbocharged. We're going to see more of that. We're going to see more flexibility required in terms of lease terms, clearly, which obviously it's a challenge for the market, because the market has to be underpinned by security of income, meeting the requirements for the lenders, obviously, in terms of rent covenant and all sort of things. So there's all those challenges that have got to be resolved over the next year or two, I think, as we find our feet again. I think it's also it's a problem, not just in terms of the underpinning of the market, but it's a problem in terms of how you work that flexibility through with the lease model we have at the moment. And that's where the serviced office sector model, I think, is the obvious answer, as we talked about earlier and Denise was mentioning, and the figures in the data, I think, probably surprised us as well as to quite how many businesses were already using that. And therefore, are we looking at a world where the traditional landlord model needs to incorporate some of that offering in the same space or the same buildings to try and meet the demands in the same locations? Because we've learnt location is still the primary consideration. So how do you meet those needs? Do we need to look more at the hub and spoke model for investors, and how that will work together as an assimilated product as opposed to different landlords in different locations? So, and I think younger people will be quite happy to live in a new way where they might go to different locations at different days of the week. And I think one of the other challenges that Denise mentioned, which interests me, is this concept of having to go in on certain days or not, and how to make sure that if you are using your offices and collaborating and you are giving training, or you're just there to be supportive and an open culture, as we like to have at our place, you need to make sure everyone's in enough on the same days and they're not just passing shifts in the night. And I think that's going to be the big learning curve, whatever models people choose over and above that, which the market's going to have to deal with, and it's going to have answers in terms of how we can provide security of income as a backdrop to that.
Thanks, Dan. I mean, I think that's a really good segue into, how our property owners and lenders are going to react to this potential erosion to security of income, and what's it going to do to value of investments and, overall attractiveness of capital flows into office property. So, Mike, do you want to take that small question?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think as a survey just highlight, we still believe offices are going to be an important part of any future investment portfolio. However, accelerated by the pandemic, a shift flexi working will impact on the type of office space that we will have to deliver to help deliver performance going forward. People can work from home effectively, but it's not perfect, and businesses and employees recognise the benefits of coming into an office for interaction and collaboration. And I think having worked at home for so long, employers will require more compelling reasons to come back to the office, and it'll start having to be an attractive proposition to sort of facilitate productivity and interaction. So I think what we're seeing is offices with high quality space in central well-located locations with attractive amenity offer are the sort of assets that we want to focus on. And I think what we have been doing is, and I think we do recognise there's going to be some short-term risk around performance, particularly in more secondary buildings or those where you've got some voids coming up. So, we have been looking to sort of, over the last sort of 2 years, almost really sort of future-proof our portfolio and sort of focus more on prime assets. But then having said that, there's also opportunities. So we know there's value-add opportunities where you can buy assets that are a bit unloved that we can then reposition to meet more of occupiers' needs. But I think we also have to remember that, particularly in the UK, office pricing is relatively attractive compared to the continent, especially after Brexit. And I think although that's gone away a bit, there's definitely a yield difference between UK and Europe. And I think that will help sort of maybe negate some of this performance differential. And also there's a low development pipeline. I mean, particularly in London, there's a very tight development pipeline and vacancy rates. And I think with lower development going forward, particularly in the short term, we're still relatively confident for sort of best-in-class offices or offices that you've got the ability to make attractive to occupiers will still perform well.
But so Sharon, I mean, if you have a lot of businesses like Atkins going from 80% to 50% utilization, I mean, surely that's going to have an impact of some sort on value and risk. I mean, how are you guys seeing that and thinking about it from a lending perspective?
So from a lender's perspective, the focus is always on cash flow sustainability to secure your debt position, in reality, service your debt and ultimately repay your debt. Many years ago, it was fairly traditional for an office occupier to enter into an FRI lease for 25 years. And if you were a strong business and therefore had a good covenant, that made for a very, dare I say, simple and straight occupier who had signed up to a contractual income stream for a long term, and obviously with upward only rent reviews, you knew that you were never going to be in a position whereby your income and your cash flow would reduce. I mean, those days in reality have been over for quite some time. The number of 25-year FRI leases that have most likely been entered into in the last 5 years are few and far between, I would suggest. So, the whole office industry has been moving in this direction for some time now. Leases have been getting shorter, whether it's 10 years or 7 years with a break at 5, that's very different to what has been in the past. But of course now, I think as Michael and everyone has agreed on, we've accelerated that position even further, and occupiers are wanting even more flexibility. So from a lending perspective, it's still about understanding the cash flow position, but recognizing and adapting to the fact that there are far more variables in that process and during the life of that occupation than had previously been the case. And as lenders, we have to adapt to that, and we have to, be able to model those variabilities, sensitize them accordingly, and come out with something that we believe is a sensible proposition. Will it mean that leverage is lower? Perhaps, perhaps not. I mean, I think it really does depend on, the asset and the sponsor and the forecast for, that particular building over a reasonable amount of time. But I think having that operational capability from within your landlord, position is something that lenders will also now start to look at, because again, you can't just offer a long-term lease and sit back and just think, well, that's fine, I can lock this away because I know that my tenant will be there forever. I think landlords now have to become far more engaged with how they manage these properties going forwards, because the tenants will be changing far more regularly. They will have far more demands that ultimately, if not, listened to and potentially delivered, will result in even more voids, more flexibility than we had previously seen. So I think there's a lot more analysis from a funding perspective around management from a landlord perspective, but also then just still understanding the variabilities in the cash flow over a period of time.
Thanks. Yeah, and it definitely feels like office property is perhaps joining retail and residential asset classes in just becoming a lot more operational, and strength of, I guess, operations and management will become increasingly important to capital providers. Denise, if I could just turn to you, I mean, are you having any conversations with property owners about space requirements? And if not, then what do you anticipate that those might look like?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're not having many of those conversations, to be fair, at the moment. We've got we've been on a journey, as I've already mentioned, and so I've got quite a clear road that we're following at the moment. So we're really having most of those conversations at the time of lease breaks still. We've got a couple of offices where we are looking to potentially sublet some spaces, but because we had already gone so far down the journey, and we had already started rationalising our estate, to be fair, we're in quite a good position. I don't mean that to sound arrogant, but we were in quite a good position, before COVID struck, from a technology perspective and also from an estate perspective. I think, as we've already mentioned, the sort of conversations are around things like and as one of the guys had said in the chat about having core and flex space in the same building, that sort of thing is, if there's any additional value adds that landlords can provide, then that's great. I know, in a couple of our buildings, we do have serviced offices in the building, and it just makes it so much easier. I hope that sort of answers your question. It's not probably the answer you wanted.
I'm not sure what was the answer I wanted. I promised one, and that was it. Okay. So thank you. I think so. I'm just turning to one of the questions in the Q&A. In a hybrid working model, will large cities be hit hardest or not? I mean, I think the message coming through is that it's all about location, and that generally speaking, large cities will continue to provide that locational attraction. So it's perhaps not so much about large versus small cities, it's more about the quality of offices within those large cities, and a migration towards the better offices in those large cities, away from I think the phrase somebody used was secondhand space.
And I think the demographic bit is also really important, isn't it? As we've touched on it, a couple of times. It's come out in the Q&A and what have you, around actually how important is the demographic, and you just can't beat the face-to-face learning and learning from your peers, and I think it was Sharon that I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was Sharon or Felicity that had said about there is a real excitement from some of the grads and stuff. They haven't met their teams yet, and they're really excited to come back into the office, and it's hard because I've got my property team, cruise team is quite a small team, but we've got quite a range of demographic in the team, and it's quite interesting who's keen to meet up in the office and who are still really reluctant. So obviously, by virtue of what we actually do, we have to go to the offices to inspect them and to have a look at them. So we're out there a little bit more. We're also the ones that are protecting our staff, making sure that the offices are COVID compliant and making people feel really safe. So we're in a really good position as a team, but we still have a couple of the team who are a little bit reluctant to come into the office. And it's the youngest member of the team who sort of said, well, that virtual call we've got after lockdown ends or whatever at the end of July, let's actually have that face to face, and let's do it in London. And and it was, she almost, dare I say, shames us into saying, actually, that's a really, really good idea. And so after, I can't wait. I must admit, I can't wait after, well, it will be at that point, well over 1.5 years, that we'll all get together, and it'll be the first time we will have seen each other properly face to face. And yeah, we've put some meeting in the diary, but it will be about going out and meeting socially afterwards, I know. So yeah, interesting times.
Thanks. There are a series of lawyer facing questions, I think, coming through the Q&A. So if I could just turn to Felicity and Dan to comment on how will flexible working change lease terms, and how will it change how real estate lawyers work?
There are a couple of consultations ongoing at the moment that might, depending on the outcome, obviously might unlock some of this. So the government slipped into one of its COVID announcements last year that it was going to take a look at commercial landlord and tenant legislation, and the Law Commission is also consulting at the moment, open till the end of this month. And one of the ideas, one of the things they're looking at is landlord and tenant legislation as well. So the 1954 Act and the 1995 Act, without going into too much of lawyer mode, but both of which were designed to do one thing but have ended up doing another in practice now. I think both of those potentially are ripe for another look. And if we could unlock the 54 Act particularly, and even to do something small like dealing with the contracting out process, which in lockdown slightly snuck up on lawyers. I think I can say this, can I, Dan? Slightly snuck up on lawyers to to make you realise that going and giving a stat deck in front of an independent lawyer when you were in lockdown was slightly easier said than done. And the alternative is a 14-day process, and so you were really impacting deal times by something which is a tiny cog in the wheel. So I think if the government does look, and actually, Jon, maybe the BPF can help us here. If you could just make my life a little bit easier by overhauling the 54 Act and lobbying the government, that would be great. But I think in all seriousness, a look at some of those longer standing legislative blockers will help to unlock the flexibility of leasing, that it's quite clear that both tenants and landlords are keen to see.
Yeah, and also the way we work, I think the other question, Jon, was how will real estate lawyers change the way they work? I think technology is clearly the answer. We're going to see the use of DocuSign, electronic platforms, much more for document execution. We need a bit of help, I think, again, legislatively to ease that and the registration process, but that we're on the right track. As a practice, we've been investing in innovation for many years anyway, using AI technologies to enhance our processing speed effectively and to make sure that we can do jobs faster and quicker and more efficiently. We have our own platform, Avail, that people might have used and other lawyers are using at the moment, which is the start of that journey. And the COVID experience and working more remotely in a home has obviously heightened the use of those products basically. And I think we'll see that again accelerating for us over the next few years.
Thanks. We're getting towards the end of our allotted time. Before I'm going to come around to all of you for some sort of very quick closing comments before we do so. But there's one question that we don't seem to have addressed yet, which is around the London waiting on salaries in a hybrid working model. So, what do we think? Is that still going to be around if people are working more from home, or is that another thing that's going to change?
I would say that it will still be around, but I think in the same way that our own working arrangements might become a bit more flexible, so might the London waiting, payment or commitment be. But I think, there's lots of things that sort of flow from this, and I think anybody who lives and works within London or another major city and lives outside, if you're only coming into an office location 2 or maybe 3 days a week, but you travel on, public transport, and you might have been, certainly like I would have come in every day of the week and would have had an annual season ticket that was reasonably discounted to make it affordable and all of this good stuff, and to ease the journey. Suddenly that dynamic doesn't work if you're only coming into an office 2 or 3 days a week, or some days once a week. And I think in the same way that London allowance will probably need to be reviewed, we also need, a review or to find an appropriate way to deal with travel costs. And I think it's all interrelated really, but I'm not aware at the moment of there being anybody who's come out clearly and said one way or the other as to what they will doing in relation to London waiting.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for taking that one. Good. Okay. I'm going to come very quickly to each of you then, maybe starting with Mike, just for some closing thoughts on everything we've talked about today. Could include stuff that you'd like the government to be doing or that the industry should be doing for itself. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's just really interesting sector. I mean, I think it was such a shock, wasn't it, when everyone went into lockdown in March, and initially everyone was thinking, it's a death of the office, no one's ever going to return. And I think particularly with the second lockdown in January, I think people realised that there is a place for the office and people need to collaborate and meet each other. So I think all I can say is the project we're working on, there's been some really interesting sort of thoughts within the team about how to improve it. And I think your point, Jon, about office being more of a service and landlords working more collaboratively rather than being that sort of historic sort of landlord and tenant relationship. And I think we're looking at definitely partnering more with occupiers rather than seeing them purely as a cash flow really.
Thanks. And if I could then turn to Denise and then Dan.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's I can't see there the requirement for an office going away. I think, you know, there's definitely a place for the office. I think the hybrid working, I think, is here to stay. I think there's lots and lots of benefits. And I think understanding how people work, so, you know, why they're coming into the office. So actually, if you've got your head down or you've got calls all day, you might as well work remotely. But if you need to come in, collaborate and what have you, then come in and do that and make the most of it, and make sure that the right people are in the office at the same time, and really coordinate that. I think that's really, really important. I think sustainability is, you know, my goodness, whether you like Greta or not, you know, sustainability is so up there and it's so important, and it's up to us. We all have the ability to make a change and make a difference. So, you know, we all need to act together and you know, make sure that we're going in the right direction on the sustainability front. You know, if you're using single-use plastics in the office, well, just stop it tomorrow. You don't need them. You know, there's lots of simple things that we can do, and just, you know, in small ways help. So property is just so important, you know, what we're doing. And again, you know, just by right sizing and going to the right size office and reducing our footprint, we're reducing the carbon and what have you that we're using. So yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, just to echo that as well, I think it's been good to see from the research that we did that there's good news there, despite what's been obviously a horrific year for everybody, whatever sector you're in. And the office sector particularly seems to be quite resilient. We know from what's happened that actually office occupiers are good rent payers, which has been quite important over the last few months and the last year or so. So there's good news in that. And we have seen, as a practice, an uptick in interest, more transactional activity more recently, which just goes to show that the market is going to come back somewhat. There may be challenges in terms of demand and supply, but this is going to be an interesting and busy period, I think, going forward. And we're involved in a lot of large-scale office developments practice at the moment, which underpins that really in city locations. So I think there's good growth opportunity. There's been a lot of talk about certain sectors in the office space not really needing space anymore and going to work entirely from home. You hear a lot of that in the media and tech sector, but actually, if you look at the data at the moment, those sort of businesses are taking up space. And we're seeing growth in other areas such as life sciences. We've got a growing practice there where there's new demand for office space and new types of office space, which is quite exciting for us. So we think there's good times to come still in the sector.
Thanks. We have hit time, and I can see the participant count dropping. So I think I will wrap things up there. Thank you very much to our panelists for sparing the time to share their insights with us. Thank you all very much for dialing in today. Hope you have a good end of the week and a good weekend when it arrives. Thank you all.